Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
But it's clear that we are reaching a time of instability, of imbalances.
You have the choice between your self-respect. Being a happy vassal is one thing, being a miserable slave is something else.
It is time to seize this opportunity and build a new independent Europe.
So these are some of the critics that are coming out after the President of the United States made it clear that he wants a deal or wants to take Greenland. The Canadian Prime Minister, the French Emmanuel Macron, the Belgian Prime Minister was weighing in. The EU Commissioner, Ursula van Leyen, says it is time to look to seize the opportunity to hold us independent Europe. Good luck with that. And now what they're doing, they don't want to be independent Europe. They're going to China. The Chancellor of Germany is going to go visit China. EU is allowing this enormous embassy, which is going to be just a spy hub in the middle of London, while giving away Diego Garcia, which will give the influence to China. And then you have the Canadian Prime Minister, acting like a tough guy, going over to China, selling out his industry, his manufacturing, and his car business. Rebecca Heinrichs, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and joins us now. Hey, Rebecca, I thought it was a huge overreaction by Europe, who got bent out of shape over the president's aggression towards Greenland. What is your take?
Hi, Brian. Well, good to be here. Yeah, I think that all of those clips that you just aired really demonstrate, some of the worst of the European responses. If your complaint is, I don't like the president of the United States making threats towards an ally, okay, that's point well taken. We get that. But then to turn around and say that, therefore, you're going to invest in the Chinese Communist Party, that is not a country that's going to respect sovereignty, the rule of law, pluralism, the freedom of the human person, the dignity of the human person. And so I think that, a lot of overreaction kind of reminds me of the first Trump administration, when you had Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, act like a tough girl and act like, Europe is going to stand up to the United States. There were some bright spots, though, Brian. The Chancellor of Germany this time, Merz, actually said that he's got to start to make some changes. He's heard the United States and he's going to do things that are better. For instance, he's not going to abandon nuclear energy, which is something that Angela Merkel did. So I think you're going to have some course correction. You did have Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, defending President Trump. So I think we're just going to have some negotiations back and forth and hopefully kind of appeal to the better angels of some of the better Europeans.
Yeah, I agree. Here's for another critic, the Norwegian Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, cut 14.
No, but I'm very explicit, and I find that unacceptable, to say that I have to have peace of another country's land. We are democracies, we are allies in NATO, but I think the idea of declaring that, I need a piece of land of another country just like that, we have to respond very clearly on that.
So, the whole thing is he's saying the president made it clear. He's like, one way or another, I'm going to get Greenland. They didn't like that. While he's flying over, could have probably got to it quicker, but they had an electrical problem. They had to turn back with Air Force One, switch planes. So more people got up and more people spoke out. So Davos used to be a sleepy conference for rich and famous people. This is all about President Trump.
It is. It's all about President Trump. Look, he's flexing American strength and American power. He's trying to use our influence to shore up the strength and security of the West. I really appreciate it. President Trump, he started off on this Greenland gambit, a little bit more, more hostile towards NATO in his rhetoric. He moved, Brian. He moved as things, really started to churn in negotiations. Whenever he saw some pushback from members of Congress, et cetera, and he was willing to negotiate. You've already seen now President Trump in his Davos speech. He moved his rhetoric to something that's like, look, the United States needs to defend Greenland and the Arctic, not just for our own security, but the security of the West. No other country can do this. If you want to come alongside us, please do. But we have to box out the Chinese and the Russians. And so I think we're in a much better position. And if Europeans would have been just a little bit more patient, and some of them were a little bit more patient. You saw the Italian Prime Minister Meloni was more patient and was willing to cooperate with President Trump. And that's where you had a lot more progress, I think.
What they're not used to doing, they're used to going through, and Rebecca, this is your world, diplomacy. There's a way to say it. Look at subtlety in the language, and there might be a distancing. We're used to looking for things by body language. The president just says exactly what he's thinking. He tells you before, and then he goes and meets with people. He tells you after. If you give him a text that's friendly and you go in public and rip him, he will publish your text. We're not used to we will never probably see anything like this again.
That's right. And the other thing that's very different that I don't understand why people can't learn this about President Trump is he's not defaulting to the bureaucracy to work out the diplomacy. He does it at the highest level. So if these countries think that they're going to send some low-level undersecretary, deputy undersecretary to figure it out privately, that is just not the way President Trump does business. He really is the chief executive of the United States of America, and you got to deal directly with him. So
let's talk about his Bureau of Peace that he's put together, the Board of Peace, I should say, where he's the chairman. Among the countries that have signed up, Argentina, Belarus, Morocco, Vietnam, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kosovo, Paraguay, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and I can go on. And the people that have not been there, pretty much no NATO people outside Turkey. You have Germany's not there, UK's not there, France is not there, Norway, Sweden is not there. I'm not sure if Belgium's there. No, they're not. They're not there. Indonesia's there. So your thought about what the approach is, this is bigger than Gaza, and it wants to be permanent, and the president's leading it. So your thoughts about this?
Well, I think it's still too early to tell. I mean, this is another one of those things where President Trump kind of thinks outside the box. Clearly, this is a shot across the bow of the United Nations, which has been totally unable to carry out this vision of global peace. And remember, the United Nations is really the stepchild of the League of Nations, which was a failure as well, to try to stop the world wars and to try to prevent World War again after the wars. And so, what President Trump has demonstrated, I think now in 2 terms, well, 1 term and 1 year of his second term, is that peace is really had by the strength of countries, the strength of the United States. It's not actually going to be negotiated by boards or by United Nations. So it is interesting that he's putting this board of peace, or whatever he's calling it, kind of forward. It does seem to me as he's chipping away at the United Nations. How long it'll last, I don't know. I think that the fact that, NATO countries are refusing to play ball is another, demonstration of sort of obstinance against President Trump.
So, Rebecca, here's an example. It's not like, okay, the UN, if they're trying to bring peace to these various regions, you go, well, they're ineffective. Are they trying? Have you seen any shuttle diplomacy between Russia, Vladimir Putin, who's on the Security Council, and Zelensky? Have you seen any shuttle diplomacy with Pakistan and India? Have you seen them going back and forth with Prime Minister Netanyahu and who's ever running Gaza? No, but you saw UNRWA, a division of the UN, working with Hamas, and some of which might have been on the October 7th invasion into Israel. So I don't see them doing anything.
That's right. No, the UN has basically, so the purpose of the UN originally was supposed, from an American perspective, which is the perspective I care about the most. If we got in there in the UN and over the last, 40, 50 years, threw our elbows around and made sure that we were using it for our own purposes and for the defense of the West, it'd be one thing. But because Americans have failed to do that, you have the Chinese using the UN. You have the Iranians using the UN. You have all these countries using the UN for their purposes against U.S. interests, which, of course, is not for peace. Their interests are not for peace. So it's exactly right. You have these multilateral institutions that have simply been corrupted. I mean, the Chinese throw their weight around for their own purposes. They block what the United States is trying to do to defend the Israelis, to block, you even have China and Russia using the UN to block sanctions against North Korea. So, people keep talking about how great the UN is, but the UN has been essentially used to block U.S. interests and to block efforts for global peace and stability. So
the Syria situation, I want to go to that, and Iran. The president says Iran's willing to talk. I don't know if he means that or not. But what would be there to talk to Iran about? They keep threatening the lives of the President of the United States. They blame Israel and the U.S. for the unrest in their country when they know it's squarely on their shoulders. They underreported how many deaths. They said over 2,000. It's well over 15,000 they shot in cold blood in their streets. This whole Iranian government has to be rattled to the core.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be any reform of the current Iranian government under the Ayatollah, Brian. And as the president sort of or his deputies, you saw Witkoff saying that maybe we can talk. Whenever there is that kind of rhetoric being used by our government, you also see U.S. forces moving into the region. So there's some forces moving from the Indo-Pacific theater sort of into the CENTCOM theater even now. And so I don't know if the president is still considering military force against the regime. He drew that red line, Brian, as you've talked about a lot, about saying that the Iranian government regime couldn't kill protesters, and they have. And the Ayatollah continues to threaten President Trump. He's on X running his mouth, threatening President Trump as recently as the last couple of days. And so I don't think this is over yet. I don't think there's any negotiating to be had with the current Ayatollah. I do think it's time for a different regime in place and to let the Iranian people decide their future.
Rebecca, what can you make of what's going on in Syria? They're trying to reclaim all their territory and push the Kurds out. Turkey loves them pushing the Kurds out. The Kurds are probably the most loyal people in the region. They're great fighters. Now they're getting hit by Iran, and Iran looks at them as a problem. I think they could basically, pound for pound, they would crush any type of fighting force Iran could put together. What is their future like, and how do you feel about ISIS, the ISIS detention center moving to Iraq?
Well, that's terrible. I mean, you saw some evidence that this ISIS detention center might, some of these people might be released, et cetera. I mean, Syria is going to constantly be a challenge for the United States. I support the Trump administration's efforts to try to work with the new government in Syria because, under Bashar al-Assad, that was a pro-Iranian proxy in the region. And I understand people's concerns. Senator Lindsey Graham has been concerned that, listen, like this guy who's running Syria now, I mean, he was a member of a terrorist organization just a couple of days ago. So, we have to be really careful as we watch this. I'm very concerned, as you are, about the Kurds. As you said, the Kurds have been loyal and fighting alongside, those who want a better future and don't want to be governed by the Islamist regimes in the area. And so it's just going to take a lot of effort. I still am hoping and am confident that the United States can use our diplomacy and our pressure against the Syrian government to make sure they don't do really stupid things that run against our interests, especially when it comes to the Kurds.
I guess. What do you think we need in terms of assets for us to be able to hit Iran? The President of the United States, he takes his time, he thinks about it, he gives talks a chance, and when they don't pan out, he does take action. And now you have the U.S., we have an aircraft carrier, I believe, that's arrived.
Yeah. So here's a couple other things of why I've actually, although I'm eager and getting impatient for the U.S. to make good on President's red line that he drew and to enforce it in some way, but I also appreciate that he's taking his time. President Trump is almost impervious to this, the crowd pressuring to do that. He's just he just moves at his own pace. And I do think there's some things that needed to happen first before the U.S. could do anything. We had to evacuate American and allied personnel. That takes time. I also heard from some incredible analysts that the Israelis wanted to collect some intelligence on how the Iran regime would react if they thought a threat was coming. So it does make sense to me that the U.S. may head fake a threat, an attack. You allow the Israelis to collect on what the Iran regime does whenever we say that, so that whenever we do strike, we can get more targets. And the other thing is we needed to get assets into the region. We have had a lot of assets into different theaters, and so we need to move them in and get them in place. So I think all that makes sense for getting sort of our ducks in a row before we do strikes. Real quick, we can do very limited strikes against IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Those are the folks that are protecting the Ayatollah and the mullahs. We can do strikes against them. We can do big cyber attacks in conjunction with that to help the Iranian people and stop the Iran regime from their crackdown and their blackouts. We can do much more massive strikes. We can go after regime heads. We can go after ballistic missile forces, which the Chinese have been sending component parts to help the Iran regime build up their ballistic missile force. So we have a lot of options. The Iran regime is very weak, so I'm not as worried about retaliatory measures against the United States, which the Iran regime has been threatening. So I think the president's got a lot of good options before him.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca, I'll tell you what, for someone like you in foreign policy, everything went on hyperspeed. Usually it takes forever. You analyze, there's a meeting, there's a summit, everything's going at once. And then the president made statements to the Wall Street Journal, picked up by the New York Post, that he wants Cuba to flip flip governments by the end of the year and do something that even John F. Kennedy wasn't able to do. Raul Castro, I think, is in his 90s, technically running the country, and which is just an absolute abomination. Do you think he's got a shot at doing that?
I think he does, and I want to pull foot stop speaking about the speed too. You talked about how fast everything's going. I've been doing foreign policy a long time, and one of the things that people kind of always push back on, the experts, is that a president of the United States only has one or two things he can get done in a term, and you've got all this domestic pressure too. He's got to handle his domestic needs. President Trump it's just this empirically true. He has been able to do necessary things domestically, crack down on illegal immigration, get the border under control, do deportations of those who are criminal, illegal aliens, while he's conducting very muscular foreign policy. He's doing it at the same time. And so in addition to doing multiple theaters, we're talking a lot about our hemisphere.
Yeah.
And it is true, President Trump is focusing on our hemisphere, but he's not neglecting faraway lands either. He still cares about the Middle East. He still cares about the European theater, and he still cares about the Pacific theater. And so, yes, I do think that the president has got 3 years left, and I think we're still going to see some pretty big moves, even in our own hemisphere.
All right, Rebecca, thanks so much. Fascinating time, great perspective with all your experience. She is the senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Rebecca Heinrichs, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.